how we create the deficit absolutely matters. And I think I was very naive to this concept in 2021. I was given the option by my coach to create the deficit using cardio or by lowering food. And because inherently I was very nervous about being at low food for that long, I went into it and I'm like, yeah, let's push the cardio. And I continued as he gave me the option, like I continued to push that. I'm like, yeah, let's do the cardio. Let's do the cardio. And at a certain point, like food wasn't even under, I think it was like 1,400, 1,500. And I was doing like 90 minutes of cardio a day. And that's something that I think a lot of people, they miscalculate how much of an impact cardio actually is going to be. And on the inverse side of this, I know there's a lot of people who they'll be very resistant to add cardio in because they just don't enjoy doing it. They feel like they're really not able to recover at this point, yet they continue to dig themselves into this dietary hole where eventually they're eating very low calories just to sustain doing a low amount of cardio. And sure, if it's necessitated, if it's the way that this individual needs to create the deficit, that's one thing. But when we're talking about just preference, we need to find some equilibrium in how we're creating the deficit and understand the risk and the cost of creating it one way as opposed to another. So when we look at really a 5-step process on creating this deficit, the big things here are going to be making sure that there is a high degree of accuracy in food reporting. This is absolutely essential and noted earlier within those pillars of getting contest lean, getting stage lean, food reporting, food adherence, that needs to be dialed in, and we need to be able to do this repeatedly. Now, past this, creating that deficit, one of the avenues I think a lot of people aren't capitalizing on is exploiting your step count. And I think this is an area that overall is much less fatiguing than structured cardio, than doing the stairs, than doing incline treadmill. And I think if I'm being honest, this was one that I wasn't really consistent with monitoring despite, doing so much structured cardio. So it's like maybe at the beginning of prep, my steps were 12,000, 15,000 because I was very motivated and very excited about getting leaner. But then what happened over the next several months? As I became more tired, I stopped going on walks at night. I stopped parking a little bit further away from wherever I was going to. I would find ways to inadvertently reduce the amount of activity I was doing on a regular basis, which ultimately that dropped my step count pretty low, which that activity, even though it's not going to be as great as the calorie burn that you get from simply doing cardio, it's still something that adds up. And if we're not keeping a ready eye on what that flux is over the course of contest prep, you can easily lose 6,000, 7,000 steps from what your normal is without even realizing it. Now, the other aspect to this is exploiting recovery, because when it comes to hunger signaling, I really think this is the area that I guess it falls under the umbrella of like fatigue management, is like, if you want to manage the fatigue, the dietary fatigue that comes with eating very little food, you really have to consider what tools we have to drop off that dietary fatigue while in prep, because the two most common tools that can be readily accessed would either be increasing food or getting more sleep. I mean, obviously doing less activity, but in the case of someone who has a set amount of structured cardio to do per day in a training session, it's like, okay, we really only have the food intake, which arguably we can't really go past if we're trying to be adherent and we're trying to lose body fat. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with looking at our sleep patterns, making sure that we are doing everything we can to maximize how much rest we're getting every night. And even within the sense of like, okay, looking at activity level and being very cognizant of like, how much activity am I doing that's unnecessary? How much can I streamline the additional non-exercise activity that I'm doing? And would I actually benefit from taking more time to recover on a regular basis? And this was something that really allowed me to get more out of my efforts, my last prep. Now, I kind of already touched on this, and I mean, the last two I'm kind of combining, but leveraging cardio with respect to its cost. So understanding that, the cost of doing cardio as opposed to lowering food, they're not equitable. And there's even there's even secondary cost of picking specific modalities of cardio that can be even more taxing, which is why I was that person. And very much she was like, okay, like I'm just going to keep pushing up cardio and then that's going to allow me to eat more and then I won't feel as bad. But there's a point where that just simply isn't true. So approaching creating your deficit with this in mind that like, okay, cardio is going to ultimately impact my training performance because it's going to be utilizing the available resources, the calories, in order to get through these sessions. Now, what does that leave me with going into my training sessions? Not a lot. So if we can keep cardio not necessarily completely out of contest prep, I think that's very unrealistic. But if we can keep it only to what is the minimum effective dose for us to have in place so that we can still capitalize on these training sessions and ultimately help us better retain muscle, this is going to be better in the long run for the look that we're trying to bring to stage.